Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Security Tapes. So, today we have a very interesting episode for you. We see the return of Greg Collins, who has been on with us before, and I can tell you is already scheduled for future casts as well. He's proven a bit of a hit, and Greg will do a slight intro in a second. We've also got Mark with us, Mark Spencer. Mark, again, is going to. In fact, Mark, I'll ask you, can you jump into your introduction, sir? It'd be great to hear who you are, where you're from, and why you're here today.
Yeah, sure. Mark Spencer. I currently work as a security lead for a financial institution. I've been quite lucky that I've had the opportunity to work across various different areas of IT. So everything from help desk all the way through to managing networks, virtual machines, physical servers, data centers. I'm excited to be here. So Vin got in touch. He obviously saw something on my LinkedIn which didn't lead to a introduction to try and sell me something, so it was quite welcomed. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. And Greg, obviously we've had an introduction before. We know a bit about you, but just for anyone who's meeting you for the first time, so
My name's Greg Collins. I'm cyber lead at another bank, so I'll keep that one under my hat. I'm an engineer, even though I've got cyber lead title. I'm an engineer. Think like an engineer. Will always be an engineer. Will die an engineer. Punching above me weight doing the cyber stuff. But here we go. Glad to be here. Lovely to meet Mark, and lovely to be invited back.
Awesome. So, gents, you've both had a background as doers, really. I know, Mark, you said you'd done like the help desk stuff, and you'd done a bit of stuff in infrastructure and data centers and things like that. And one of the things when we were putting this cast together, we were going to talk about the software as a service space, platform as a service, and as people are more and more shifting all their things up into the cloud, it brings a slightly different set of problems that we had when everything was on computers you owned, you controlled, you had your data center, you had your on-prem. I'd be interested to hear sort of the main challenges as you see them, and perhaps we can dip into them sort of one by one. As you're the new guy here, Mark. Let's start with you, and then we'll hear what Greg's take is on it.
Yeah, sure. So over the years, I've been in many sales pitches for SaaS solutions where they pull out the pizza as a service example, where if you a SaaS service is like going to a pizza restaurant. You sit down, you organise people to come with you to the restaurant, and then the restaurant's the guys who are going to make, fire, and deliver the pizza. I don't think SaaS in that format actually exists anymore, because we don't really have a solution where a business user gets access to a SaaS solution which doesn't then integrate into a whole pile of other things. As we're moving more to kind of AI, you can see businesses quickly, jumping on board with that. And as soon as you start kind of adding these kind of services to a SaaS platform, you've now got a different integration to a different vendor and a different supplier. And we're seeing this on a daily basis, and I have done for the last sort of 3 years in my various different roles. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I see for businesses at the moment, because managing your own infrastructure, managing your own data center, managing your own networks, like people have done that for so long now. We've all had a data center that we want to secure, that provides the company services. I think we're quite mature as an entity where we all know what we're doing, but now we're forming relationships with other partners who we don't necessarily see the full picture of how they integrate, how they manage. And even best will in the world, contractually, you can put guidelines and controls in place. But when you look at the headlines that do hit, the news around cybersecurity breaches, it is now a key thing which seems to be a real issue. Be interesting to hear your guys' opinions on this as well, and kind of thoughts as well.
Yeah, Greg, maybe roll with that.
Yeah, SaaS, software as a service. And when I first saw this, or I got to do assessment. So I mentioned before when I was on a previous podcast, I was working as an architect for a large, very prestigious financial services organisations. And one of the things they were asking me to look at was SaaS service. So when you look at a SaaS service, it depends how you use that SaaS service. So there's two ways I'll look at it. First, if it's integrated into an app. So take, for example, you've got a SaaS service integrated into an app. So you've got a banking app, you've got some sort of app where you're relying on a service like an authentication service, for example. Okay. I've started assessing them. So one of my jobs was to look at these SaaS services and to say, right, okay, how resilient are these services? So security head off, first of all. How resilient? So in your stack, you use 7 different SaaS services, and you've got a bunch of stuff that you use yourself that you've built that run in a serverless environment in AWS. What happens if one of those 7 services go down? So let's pick an analogy that I'm sitting out on a business meeting with my business banking app that I've got and my business banking card that I'm trying to impress people and I'm trying to pay for dinner and tell them what a fantastic app we've got, and my payment doesn't go through because one of my SaaS providers that I'm using has gone down. So I'm sitting there looking like a lemon because I can't pay because a SaaS service that I've been sold to say this is completely resilient has actually gone down. So when you look at under the hood at a SaaS service, you first of all think, okay, it's going to be using all the really clever bits in AWS, Azure, all of those. Everything's abstracted from you. It's serverless. Everything's hunky dory. It's not. So when you look at the assessment, you realize that someone's just built a data center in Azure and there's load balancers. They run their own load balancers and they might not have load balancers and they might not have these things. And then you start to realize this isn't very resilient at all. So someone is selling me software as a service and it isn't. It's just a data center in the sky with no resilience. So that's the first thing I say. You've got to be really careful how you look at these things and how critical they are. If it's critical to run your business, then you really, really, really need to look at what these things do and take it with a pinch of salt that it's a true SaaS service. So that's one of the things, the first thing I'd say. The second most important thing that I'd say on it is SSO integration. Yeah, I've said on this before. If it can't go into your IDP, don't use it. If you can't federate how you connect to that and how you authenticate it, don't use it. That's the second thing I'd say. And the last thing I'll say is from the type of business that we run, the SaaS solutions are led by developers. And so the SaaS solution says, oh, I can see this SaaS solution. It's really cool. It will do it. And it's pure shiny kit. It can do what you want to do. But after they've moved on, you're left running this thing that isn't resilient. It isn't secure on all of those things. So that's just what I'd add to the mix. That's my experience of it. Just be careful. Here there be dragons.
So just from the SSO piece, because I know not everyone is going to be in the audience is going to be really up on SSO, SaaS, how it all fits together, the various pieces of middleware and pieces of glue that hold the whole operation together. SSO sounds like a great idea on the surface, but of course it also suffers slightly from the putting all your eggs in one basket problem. I don't know if you could talk more to that.
I come around to that. Mark, sorry, Mark, go on, Mark.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's a great point that Greg makes around making sure that you have SSO as part of your SaaS services. Now, typically, the people who are selecting most of the SaaS services within a business are not technical teams. It's someone in HR who's been sold something pretty fancy that's going to fix a problem for HR. It doesn't integrate into whatever your platform is for SSO. So now you've got Doris in HR who's responsible for user access management on a SaaS solution. That's the alternative. And then this is where you end up, and it feels like quite an old term now, shadow IT. We used to use this all the time, like five, 7, quite a few years ago, where we would have that situation. People would just go out and buy a service just to do this job, but it never just does that job. And when you look at kind of engineering patterns and architectural strategies, that doesn't exist. Having a single solution that does one thing no longer exists. But this is where you your procurement controls and support for people want a problem to be fixed is really important. So we're starting to see that not only contractually, it's really important that we have the right controls to make sure that our SaaS providers offer the service that we're after that matches our expectations, maybe with what we've built previously on-prem, but also that we don't have a non-IT team now managing a service who are not, it's not their job. You could argue like skills-wise and things like that, but it's not HR's job to make sure that they're doing role-based permissions correctly. So they shouldn't be managing our back at all. They should be just doing HR stuff. And this is the challenge that I've seen over many, many years, that people are sold a solution but not told the expectation and responsibilities that they're now picking up.
And I'll just add to that as well, it's starters, movers and levers. That's what gets us, starters, movers and levers. When someone set up local security in an app, you disable it in your IDP, it's disabled. That user no longer has access. You've no idea what accounts are set up in there. We've no idea what's got. And Doris, as Mark said, Doris has left, but Doris has got admin access to this, and she was fired 6 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we still see in pen tests, red teams. Our usual line of work is it's super, super common. You'll have your scope and you'll be doing reconnaissance against an organisation, and you'll find out they've got all this stuff stood up that conventional IT doesn't have a Scooby-Doo about, but it's there, and there's loads of company data stored in it. It's just on someone else's system. And I think more and more it's because in the old world, as it were, people very much saw their systems as computers, servers they had control over, computers they had access to. And I think nowadays the question is, where does your data live? That someone in your organization controls, they put your data into that. And in my mind, if you're putting company data there, that is becoming your problem. And that's something that you need to map out and understand. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I've got into someone's email inbox and I've been able to pivot into something like Salesforce or a CRM, or honestly, even an email service for spraying out marketing mail shots. There's tons and tons of emails in there, tons and tons of client data in there. Depending on what you do, that might not be something that you want people to know about. So the whole idea of what's ours and what we're responsible for securing becomes a very, very different question.
If I could just add to that as well, the regulator don't care. The regulator, Mark's works in the regulated businesses. I've worked in regulated businesses. They don't care. It's your data. If you've not done your due diligence of where that data is, that's your problem. And a regulator will fine you and take you to task on that. They won't take this other company that you brought on board. That one's down to you.
FCA have recently put out a couple of articles around not having MFA enabled for accounts, and they've been very clear that you will be held to task if you are breached, and there's a finding that you don't have MFA enabled on your account. So it plugs into the SSO stuff, and rightly so. You can see them taking a stauncher stance on these are our expectations. If you don't meet them, be prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. So with I'd be interested to hear more about the identity provider side of life and sort of your thoughts, particularly Greg, on architecting it, because if you're going to get SSO on everything, you're going to plug it into as much of the stack as you possibly can, so you can control identity and access through a single control plane. That is not a trivial architecture choice.
So these are discussions that I've had quite a few times, and using a variety of different IDPs for, one for work and one for customer. They should always be segregated. You shouldn't be using the same for customers and staff members. That gives you that kind of segregation. And again, this is where we're venturing into not a very mature area of IT and security in particular, because normally it would be just whatever you had on premise. Like, you would manage that all internally. And as we're now moving to more cloud-based solutions which need third-party IDP services, it really does raise a question. So I've seen various different implementations over the last few years. It makes sense, I guess, to have two different services running customer and staff. But then you've got to take into account your staff skills, resources to do it. How do you build that model where you can support both efficiently, or do you farm out that responsibility to a third party? So again, we end up in this same conversation around SaaS solutions and the same problems with now potentially a PaaS service. It's an interesting time, and I think you can see, especially over the last 10 years, businesses trying to kind of get their head around this new way of working and these new services where we don't necessarily have the control. We've seen a couple of businesses, IDPs being breached recently, and some of the headaches that have happened there. And as a security person, you often are asked by the business to explain what's going on, but also why was there no backup solution for this? So you can do that, but then you end up with how many, what do you need, how many do you need to facilitate the business's requirements, and then it comes down to cost. So we're not really talking about technology, we're talking about business continuity, we're talking about business processes. And that's where, as a security lead and a security architect, that's been a big part of my role over the last 5 to 7 years. You're not discussing your like Greg mentioned, like firewall rules. We don't get into the weeds that often. When you're in that kind of position, you're talking about, right, what costs us from a business point of view if we have 4 hours of downtime, and then you go and speak to the legal team and the procurement team to make sure that that's in the contract, and that if we have any clawback policy of, like, if you don't meet this SLA, IDP person, you're going to give us the value which should match our loss, which you never end up in. So then you're now building risks for your business. It definitely feels like a different time, and cloud changes a lot of the conversations for people who are in, like, what would be traditional technical lead roles. So I haven't got an answer, just more problems, but that's where we are in the world at the moment with how IT is going with cloud services.
I think that should be on a t-shirt somewhere. No answer, more problems.
Yeah.
Talking about answers, can I play a hypothetical part? So I'm just looking at who's in the room now. We've got so much technical experience and security experience, business experience between you three guys. It's frightening, really. So I'm going to pretend that I work at a new bank we've all set up together, and I'm going to pretend that this weekend I've been reading some stuff and it scared me a bit. And I'm going to say, I'm worried, for the board as a leadership team. What I'm worried about is that. I read that when they originally set up this internet thing, it were all to do with defence, so it should be secure. But then some academics got hold of it, and that's when they pushed out the internet as we know it. And it were never meant to be what we use it for today. It was just to talk and communicate. So by nature of that fact, it were quite open. And yeah, they had passwords and things like that. But a few technical people I've got who are friends said that if we were building the internet today, we won't build it this way. And then they sort of told me about sort of layering where you've got software built on software, built on software, built on software, built on software. And I heard you guys talking about this stuff even further out of our control. And it just got me thinking, how do we cope with the fact that there could be stuff working its way all the way around our network that looks really innocent, but is actually hiding bad threats in it? I heard about something called Log-J shell or something. I don't know. I mean, how can you put my mind at rest that we're using these systems built on proprietary technology that's perhaps inherently insecure, that we're not at risk from that? How can you set my mind at rest to that issue?
I'll start by saying on that one, I'll just quickly interject here, but you are in the position you're in because of evolution. That's where we are at the moment. This is how it's evolved. So it would never have got to this state and people adopting the internet to what it does because it's evolved into that state, because it never would have got there unless we went through the cycles we went through to get there. So where we are now, it's business, it's the nature of the business. It's no different from human beings, the internet. It's got all the same flaws, all the same weaknesses. It's the same thing. Why do you lock your doors? In a perfect world, you have a nirvana, and in a nirvana, you would never lock your doors. You'd never need to. You never need an alarm on your car. You'd never need anything like that. It's the internet. That's the way it works. It works the same way because it's got humans involved in it. So that would be my first answer. It's, and in depending on what position you held in the company, I would have probably used the word naive and been fired shortly afterwards. But
And
so yeah, that would be my first take on it.
and really, this is a supply chain question, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Like even if you're talking about there's an excellent XKCE comic somewhere out on the internet of all these blocks piled high, and it's all held up by this tiny little stick. This small Linux library that's maintained by someone in deepest darkest Ohio. It's one guy. It's this tiny library, but everyone uses it, and it's not just that. It's we see this kind of thing just all across our technology stacks, and I think there is more and more of an interest in people realizing supply chain is important, not necessarily thinking about vendors, not necessarily thinking about companies you're dealing with, but what is the technology underpinning it actually made up of? What happens if there is a vulnerability in that? So Vin, you talked about Log4Shell, which was a vulnerability affecting the Log4j library, very, very widespread, and it affects lots and lots of people. But if you don't necessarily know what you have in terms of the libraries you're using, the technologies you're using, you might not know when a vulnerability comes along that we've got that, we need to go and look at that thing. You would need to run something like a vulnerability scan or a pen test or whatever it is to find it, which is not a very time efficient way of doing it. And I say this as a pen tester. It's much more efficient to carry out an exercise, something like an SBOM, software bill of materials, where you have a deep understanding of how a particular product or a stack is made up, even if it's just, say, your main production website.
yeah. I'd add to that as well. Not that I want to keep on talking. I obviously realise I talk a lot. But the other
It's all
thing
good.
I'd add to that as well is SAST and DAST. And like Mark will tell you this, that when he's promoting stuff up to his website, he's got a CI/CD stack. And in his CI/CD stack, invariably everything in there is infrastructure as code. And that's what he's doing. So he's got code. No one's got access to the console. So you're going to come to product X by a number of lines of code. That's how you get to product X. As part of that process, you've got SAST, which is static code analysis. So you're looking at what you've got to see if there's any vulnerabilities. And you've got dynamic analysis that's scanning it once it's in place. And that tells you where your vulnerabilities are. So when you're talking now, there's a Python module, for example, and this Python module has got this vulnerability in it. That's how you know the vulnerability is there. You don't do scanning anymore really like that. You're using these tools to tell you where you are. So that's how you're keeping your stack nice and clean and knowing where you are. But I'll come back to the analogy again. My stack is 50% of it. The other 50% is all these other SaaS services that I've got. Are they doing the same thing? Because my product isn't going to work unless they're doing the same thing. And my due diligence has proved they're doing the same thing. And we'll come back to what we spoke about before on the last. I bet you the retail company in the UK that's still struggling to recover from it, the two retail companies wished that they had proved that the partners who were coming to them doing work as SaaS providers and other providers stuck to their own due diligence, because that's why they got caught.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that I think of, if we're going to go back to vendors and suppliers and actual companies that you're dealing with and a part of your pipeline, so things like managed service providers, God forbid, things like managed security providers, you've got people in there who are running with high levels of privilege and are plugged into your network. Maybe you have external developers. You have all these people running with privilege and potentially using things in your name with parts of your stack, but with their own tools. Stuff that you don't know about, you don't admin. It's plugged in, but I bet you it's not written down anywhere. The knock-on is terrifying.
So I'd probably approach this slightly different. So if Vin came to me and kind of echoed his concerns in the way that he did, I would probably try and approach this more like a therapist and a salesperson at the same time, because Vin doesn't want to know about, how we're controlling external libraries. He's not really interested in the technical detail of, these are all the tools that we could have through our CI/CD pipelines and stuff like that. But usually as a security person, you know where your gaps are. Or you should, because if you don't, that's probably where you can have biggest problems. But these kind of conversations are things that you'll get from senior leaders of the business, and this is a missed opportunity, not to kind of throw every problem in the world, but to really focus in on maybe something that as a business we should be focusing on with regards to security. So Log4j, absolutely fantastic example there, where I think everyone had a really terrible Christmas that year. I know we spent an awful lot of time trying to find out what of our components are out there that is reliant on this external library. And this is where you can start guiding senior leaders within the business on maybe what's a better approach. Now, you can kind of mention, okay, we can't do this, we're going to have to do a manual check, and we're going to have to, reach out to our suppliers to make sure that we understand what libraries they're using to make sure they're not affected. As a security person, is there an opportunity there where you can pass that responsibility and that job to someone else? And this isn't to kind of shut responsibility, it's just you're going to need help. Like, as a security person, you're not going to know everything, you're not going to be able to fix everything. Technology-wise, you have to accept you are not the font of all knowledge. But how do you engage with different parts of the business which will help you secure the business? So maybe that's something in a vendor management function that could help you with, where you could ask them to go and speak to the suppliers to give a list of all the components of the version of software that you've got installed on your very important server. The sales and the opportunity, the opportunities that you could potentially get other people and other parts of the business involved to help you in those kind of really bad situations. That's something which it takes a long time. It's something I'm still learning. It's still something a skill set I need to get used to. I mean, it's definitely taking time, but that's where those sales things. Oh well, why don't we do this, or why do you look at this and fix the problems where they really need focus and attention.
Yeah, and it's a prioritizing thing, really, isn't it? There's a million things you could do and a million things that could be problematic, but realistically you have a limited amount of people, you have a limited amount of resources, you have a limited amount of time to get these things done. And even for a big business, you'd want to identify and pull those levers that are going to help you the most, the quickest, without going down the rabbit hole of realizing the whole thing's held together by Blu-Tack and sticky tape.
So I've got another question, because thanks for those answers, they were brilliant. And my other question is this thing of, I suppose I'll take it a little bit back to my experience, which is when I first went out to visit clients and they'd all jumped on the internet from an ADSL broadband viewpoint, and it were like everybody's Christmas had kind of come at once. And basically, I guess the question would be, as I asked them at the time, what are you doing to manage your users? And their sort of reply came back, we're going to stop them doing anything. We're going to prevent. And I always remember thinking at the time, I don't know if that's the best way, because aren't you better off to just allow, but say you're monitoring, but be clear about what happens if they do something they shouldn't do. And there were a big discussion then, what's the best way to get people to kind of do what you want? And I'm kind of leading into two recent things that have been in news. And because I've been reading my newspaper as a director, I've come in and I want to know about two things. One is protecting my kids and my grandkids, because they've done a wonderful thing where they've said we're going to stop people going on certain sites unless they can prove their age. So that's that one solved. So I want you to reassure me and tell me that things like VPNs won't get around that problem. And then the other one that I wanted to know about is that the government, and it's not just our government, Europeans, Americans, we've all got together and said we're not paying ransoms anymore. So from the mindset of the person who wants to block the people from going on the internet because that'll solve the problem, he's smiling. But I'm the guy who's saying let them do what they want and we'll check on them, and a bit more open. I'm thinking, are these really going to stop people doing bad things? What does everybody think about the new kind of rules that have been enforced? Will it make things worse or make things better?
So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation. And when you start talking about security, I think most people expect you to say no and block and stop and that kind of thing. And this is where, yeah, we do have issues with our industry that people see us as the no fun police. And we have to be a little bit careful of that. So that's where people will always find a way around. So as Greg said, the natural progression of the internet is the way it's happened because chaos or whatever reason it's that this is why we're in the position we're in. People will always find a way around stuff. So even if you blocked it, they would find a way to do the wrong thing. I think it's more about training and making sure that people understand what is considered acceptable and unacceptable. And that's I think we're in a good place now. If we'd have gone back quite a few years ago, we'd have probably seen people doing really stupid stuff on company assets, on company laptops, company laptops on company networks, installing God knows what, and network people freaking out because we were killing our bandwidth and all that kind of thing. I think we're in a better place now where there is an expectation of this is the right way of using this tool on this network. But I think where it'll be interesting is as society changes, like your like Gen X's and Gen Z's and all this kind of thing, everyone has a different opinion on how they should be able to use the internet. So like a lot of younger people nowadays just expect to be able to do whatever they want. So and they're the ones who are going to find a way around it and never really sort of buy fully in of this is how you accept this is how you use a corporate asset, or this is how you use the internet on a corporate network. But for me, I'd always you definitely need to monitor, but you also need to make sure that your expectations of how to use something is firmly set out, and then it's down to the person to either follow it or not, and then that allows you to correctly handle that situation where maybe they have done some potentially bad stuff. Saying no is much easier though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably the wrong person to ask this question because I'm not used to not having high levels of access on systems.
Yeah.
But without getting too political, it's I feel like the knee-jerk reaction of legislating against things, even if it comes from the right place, I think is often not the right tool for that problem. And I think I remember being a teenager, and you find ways around things, and it's no different to the whole shadow IT problem. It's the same set of behaviors. It's the same set of behaviors I use in my skill set every day as a pen tester and a hacker. I think it is more of a messaging thing. What's going on at the moment, and I think just going back to what I said before about the levers thing, is that the hard thing about security is understanding you have this rainbow world of different controls and different levers and different things that you can do to make things more secure and to make people ultimately safer, which is what we're talking about here. The difficult part is knowing which lever to pull, which is a very non-answer to it, but I feel like legislation is much too blanket.
Yeah, I agree. And just to be clear, the examples I were giving for a corporate device on a corporate network, like legislation which then affects everyone, I'm not sure if that is the right thing to do. I understand why, but someone in the government deciding a set of rules, what is that based on? How do we monitor that? How do we manage that? How are you managing how people have access to stuff? What happens with that data? They're the things which I'm like, okay, that could easily be corrupted for you to use in various different ways. That's where I have a real problem with. I've grown up with the internet with very little controls, and you do end up seeing some pretty awful stuff which no one should really be seeing. But you end up in this philosophical kind of conversation around the internet should be open for everyone. You can see whatever you want and do whatever you want, but in that scenario, there's always someone who gets hurt. So then you're in a conversation around, well, we can protect these guys, but not these guys, and we can do that. But I don't, and this is the maturity that I talk about within security. We're not there. We're clearly not there. We're now in a position where the mummy and daddies of the government are implementing blanket stops on stuff. I'm not sure if that's a great thing or not. I mean, it certainly can help benefit society in some way, especially protected, but the protection of children and things like that. That's absolutely, I'm all for. But yeah, I don't think we'll come up with an answer in this podcast, unfortunately.
No, we're not being paid enough for it.
Yeah, oh, we're getting paid. Oh, amazing.
Greg, have you got a take?
Yeah, I've got a take on that. I've always got a take on everything. My first thing I would say is, Vin, stop reading the Daily Telegraph, or director Vin, who you're coming across, because that's what that sounds like, a bit Daily Telegraph, how we can do it. The second thing I'd say is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I 100% agree with Mark. There's some things you need to legislate, and there's some things you just can't. And in my experience, the other thing is there's nothing that we haven't seen other countries try to do. So we live in a fairly free and open society where we are. And I've worked in regions where the internet's locked down, and I've worked in regions where you can't get to certain things. I'll give you an example. In Egypt, for example, you can't run IPsec VPNs at home. You're not allowed. That's legislation. And when business comes across that, it's a nightmare because you can't do half the things you need. So that legislation is really clumsy, and it might not necessarily work, and it affects business. So that's what I'd say. I always say you should try and abstract what you do security wise as much as possible, right? And it's not computer says no. I hate computer says no. And I hate the first answer is computer says no, you're not allowed to do it. I'd rather try and abstract what we do, because the first thing when you say computer says no is you start to strangle innovation. And if you work with developers, you want them to innovate. You want them to innovate. So people are really smart, and you want to work with that smartness, but try and do it in a safe enough fashion. So you've got to make your controls fairly light touch, but know what the real dangerous stuff is. That's probably my take on it. That's what I would say on it. It's a difficult thing. You can switch everything off and you can say, no, you can't do that. But as Mark says, you'll find another way. That's what people like Adam, because if this was the case, then there wouldn't be people like Adam, because they're the ones who are finding another way.
Thanks for the answers, guys. And it was slightly loaded, I guess, because I've got experience of speaking to a lot of people like you guys. It's kind of what my job's turned into. A lot to do with why the podcast exists is that the knowledge in this room, if we can get what you three guys know, and that helps somebody who's also doing security at a 50 or 100 user company, but got the same challenges as you, but just no resource or budget, and still got the CEO reads the Telegraph or the Guardian for balance and comes in with these questions. It's. I think for me, it does come down to maturity, because it was funny. I spoke to somebody today who's coming on a future podcast, and he said something I've heard more than once now. And he said pretty much the same as another CISO, which is one of his directors said, "So when are we going to be secure then?" And he went, "Sorry?" And he said, "When are we going to be secure?" And he said, "No, we're not." And I told him the story of the other CISO who told us that when his director said that, he said, no, we're not going to be secure. If we're not already compromised and I don't know about it, we're going to be compromised. And when we are, what we'll hope is that all the frameworks and stuff we followed made it harder for them to compromise us, but there were compromises. And then it's about, have I drilled the team enough? are we getting back to business as usual quick enough? That's why I'm here, because I'm here to make sure we're making it as hard as we can. To quote the CISO earlier, when you're running away from a bear, you don't have to be faster than the bear, just than the other person that you're with running away from the bear. And he sort of summed it up like that, I guess. And I think there is that disconnect, and it kind of links with this disconnect. You'd hope the government were better than anybody when it comes to understanding where we are with security, but I don't think they are. I think they're frighteningly way behind maturity-wise, and I think you'd then hope that a board of directors were pretty clued up on it. And again, I don't think they necessarily are. And I think I did a post the other day on LinkedIn because I've been reading a really interesting book about cyber risk and systemic cyber risk, and it got me thinking about airplane crashes because I used to love that black box program, and I was thinking about one. I had to check it. I'm not gonna lie, I had to check it on Google. I haven't got a great memory, but it were a Japan aeroplane, and literally an engineer had not tightened the screw enough, just one little twist. And that caused a massive aeroplane to come down with about 400 souls on board. And the ripple effect of that is just unbelievable. You can't imagine what it meant for all the 400 people's families, the 400 people themselves. If you want to put a monetary cost on it, with colossal, a human cost, it's frightening. It then also took every single similar modelled Boeing plane out of the sky for quite a long time, which affected the businesses involved and people's travel, and just all from one loose screw. And it had this massive knock-on effect. And I think about the airplane industry, and I think about Midnight Cowboy nipping on a plane in the 70s with his drugs strapped round him. And you can imagine if he had made it and not got caught, he'd have been sat on a plane going, yeah, I've done it. And then bomb goes off that someone else would have got on and he hadn't done it, because that's how bad security used to be. But now you can't even get in an airport, it's that good. And then you think about where we are with our industry. Because when I started working, there wasn't an industry in what we do. And I just think if you think about when they first took that first plane off ground, Wright brothers, all them years ago, and what advances we've made, and what other organisations exist outside what aeroplanes do on a day job to make those things safe, and what we learn from every crash, and just their overall approach. And then you think about where we are with security, and we're just so immature, it's frightening. And I guess so. I suppose that's the point, really. And I think what I'm hoping for all of us that the outside bodies do a good job of pulling together to inform the people who are steering where we're going, I guess, because that's what needs to happen. I think we need much better coordinated thinking outside the actual arena. And when we're inside it, doing stuff like this is really important. I think it's great that you guys have come along and shared your knowledge to help people who just don't know as much as you, being candid.
I think most people know. It's just you have to make a decision at some point to decide whether you accept the risk. And again, this is a lot of kind of what we do within security now. It's not saying no, it's just highlighting if you choose to go down this route, you just need to be aware that these are the risks and this is how we see the risk. And I think that's probably our biggest tool within security. It's not just blanket, you can't do that, because realistically, no one in security has got that level of power to stop a business from progressing. But it's just making sure that they understand the risk that they're proceeding with if they choose not to fix or mitigate what you're highlighting. And again, it goes back to that kind of sales piece. You're constantly selling the idea that security is a good thing. I've worked for like cloud first companies who have they've been very successful over a short period of time because they've just said to their engineering team, just go, just develop, fix a problem, go, get it done. And then that's great, and you see that kind of growth of the business very quickly, but then they're going to have to backtrack and start aligning their procedures, policies and controls in line with auditable actions that are going to come from an internal or external audit. And that's where, again, that can be quite more difficult than going into a regulated industry, which are used to being regulated with a pen and paper. So that makes it a little bit easier, and that's where you can sometimes see the difference in maturity around risk acceptance and risk logging risks as well. I mean, Adam's probably got like a whole pile of examples where he's done a pen test, he's highlighted the issue, he comes back the next year, oh, guess what, lads, the same issue's still there. Have you have you thought about fixing this because it's critical? And you know, it's frustrating, but it's selling this to the business without going through a breach. The best time to work in security is the day after being breached. Like, I've worked with some senior leaders who joined a large mobile network quite a few years ago after the breach, after a large breach happened. And my first question is like, why on earth did you go to that company after they were just significantly breached and they were all over the paper and all that kind of thing? And it was quite a quick conversation. It's like, it's the best time. I had an open checkbook. I grew my team of security engineers and security leadership from 5 to 35 in less than a year because they'd seen the risk actually happen, and now it was time to do something about it because they'd seen the impact. And yeah, that can be the tricky bit. And again, the maturity comment that you've mentioned there, Vin, as well, is that's where we are. Hopefully we don't have to go through a breach. We can fix the problems, but that's the situation. We don't sell ice cream in security. You know, we're selling broccoli. You know, we're trying to make sure that people eat the right food, they're getting a balanced diet. You know, the business want ice cream, they want a quick fix and move on very quickly. That tends to be it. But you know, but that if it works, then why change it? You know, and that's why you've got to sell the peas and carrots. That was a really weird analogy, wasn't it?
Oh, I quite liked it. I
Totally
thought it was
works for
quite
me.
funny.
I'm going to use that.
I saw the same. I saw the same thing with agile. So you've got agile zealots. You've got the agile. I call them the agile. I probably can't say that. I was going to call them the agile Taliban, but I better not. So this is the way you work. This is agile works, and this is the agile. You do it, and you fail to fix and stuff like that. And I've had conversations with agile people, and regulated businesses and agile don't work because agile thinks sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint. What do I need to do in this sprint? What do I need to do in the next sprint? What do I need to do in the? But then when you're coming at it from a regulated point of view, and you work with a regulator, what's your 2 year plan for this? 2 year plan. I'm only 2 sprints down. I've only got 3 months worth of plans, and why would I want to be wanting to do that? Because it's not going to affect the short sprints that I'm in. And I've even had working for banks the agile Taliban saying to you, well, can't we just put the security, retrofit the security in afterwards? Why are we worrying about that now? And there is a certain argument to that as well. Because when you're working for a startup, why strategize for 2 years when invariably a lot of people don't get to 2 years in a business? They are literally surviving sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint. They've got a bunch of money that's been given to them by an investor. And the investor says, well, we're going to have to take 2/3 of that or a third of that to put down for a year 3 position for security. And the things they're going to laugh at you because we might not be, we want our return after 2 years. So we don't care about that because we want our return. We want it to go in. And that's why it's such a delicate balance. And I'll come back to what Mark says as well. It's about risk. And are you willing to own the risk? The problem is in business, they want the security team to own the risk and the business people to own the glory. And that's going to come across, and that's the way it is. That's the way it is. It went wrong. Why did it go wrong? And there's nothing more slopey shouldered than slippery than a sea level who you're trying to give pin a risk on. Honestly, it's like the Matrix. They're like that as the bullets go past them, which are the risks that they won't take. It's quite funny, but again, I'll come back. And the thing is, it's attention to detail. It's exactly as you say. It's a little thing that gets you each time. A teeny tiny teeny thing that you miss, which is the untightened screw thing. What you were saying, that untightened screw, we've got the equivalent, and our untightened screw brings us back to the beginning of the conversation is an SSO or a SaaS platform that you're using where someone's got their own admin account that you didn't know about. Then someone like admin who's compromised that person's email now has access to their admin account. That admin account, you're able to generate tokens for making API calls. You're able to do that and you're in, you've got the data, you're done, it's finished. So that's all I'll add on that. It's great conversation though, lads. Really, really great conversation.
Yeah, the agile and embedding security into agile is an interesting conversation. Like, I've been on both ends of like just really not being able to engage or get any sort of traction into implementing security into there. But I've had some good examples as well. But it depends of where people are on that kind of development cycle. So if it's early stages and they've got to kind of put a thing in, that can be, and logically it makes sense to do it at that point, like do the waterfall method of we're going to do our checks before you go in. But there are opportunities to do that, and again, it just goes back to selling the benefits, engaging with the team, not being the fun police, making sure that as a security person, you slowly embed yourself into that process. It sounds like a disease, like it's like the COVID approach. You slowly kind of get in there and, make sure that, have you thought about this, guys? Oh, yeah, we'll do that. That's dead easy. Those quick wins, which may not fix the bigger issues, but you kind of start selling and start implementing yourself. That's worked really well in the past. In some of the businesses that I've been, we actually found a whole pile of problems, worked with the team in an agile way through scrums to fix a whole pile of issues. But you have to have that discipline as a security person and thick skin as well. The thick skin is definitely something you need to create quite quickly, because otherwise you end up holding a lot of resentment because people are just not listening to reason. They're just proceeding with security risks, and it can work. I agree with you, Greg. Like, it is a difficult battle. It doesn't logically make sense that security fits within agile and sprints and stuff. But again, you just need to pick and choose your battles, and sometimes it's accepting this isn't great. Yeah, people aren't gonna pick up the responsibility or the ownership of the risk, but as long as you document it somewhere and you don't put your name against it, you've documented the risk. It's there for people to have a look at. If anyone says, "Oh, it's a security risk," yeah, it's great. Yeah, it is. It's your risk. And absolutely not. If it's my risk, we stop what we're doing now, because I don't accept this risk. And it's that kind of that gamesmanship you need to develop a little bit, and thick skin. So that that salesman approach, that LinkedIn salesman who's sending out 1,000 messages, but he might get that bite, from some unsuspecting security lead in one financial organisation. Don't do that, guys.
I'm thinking we should have a new game. If I ever get invited back on one of these, we should start a new game. Pin the risk on the exec. It's like an upgrade to pin the risk on the donkey.
Oh,
I love
God.
it.
None of us will win.
Guys, that's great. So I've really enjoyed that today, and as usual, I just feel we could go on, but we've all got things to do. Well, you guys have. I might just stay on myself, talking to myself. I love it. But no, definitely, I will want you guys back. Has anybody got any other questions before I sort of begin the wrap up, or anything they'd like to add before I sort of wrap up?
I mean, for me, thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Great to meet you, Greg. Adam, Vin, obviously we've had a few conversations already, so really appreciate it. It's been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, same here. It's good fun. I like these. These are good fun.